Hi, I'm Kristen, and today I will be sharing what it was like to have contact experiences as a child and just to be an experiencer as a child. My earliest memory with something supernatural happening occurred in 1991. So at the beginning of that year, I believe, when I was about 6 years old, my grandfather passed away. And I vividly remember being told by my father that my grandfather had died. And I remember just thinking like, oh, it's just like any other kind of day. And I remember my mother asking, like, do you understand what Daddy is telling you? Like, your grandfather he's died. And I said, yeah, I understand. And I remember getting up and then just going back to whatever it was that I was doing. So at that age, I didn't really have a concept of death, or I couldn't really grasp death. I just knew that somebody was gone, they wouldn't be back. But for whatever reason, being told that news, I wasn't affected by it at all. So cut 2 months later, and it was Thanksgiving, and we were just about to sit down to eat, and the phone rang. And so I remember being in the kitchen. I suppose I was helping out with like getting plates or helping bring some food to the table or something like that. And so most of the rest of the family was in the dining room, getting settled, getting into their chairs. As the phone was ringing, my mom came out of the other room and she answered it, and she kind of just went silent and then fell down in her chair and then just started crying. And I remember I was just standing in the kitchen just thinking like what on earth is going on? Like all she did was answer the phone and say hello, and now like what's going on? And I remember like walking up to her and just kind of staring, because again, I was very little and I didn't know what to do. I think that might have been the first time that I remembered seeing my mother cry or a parent cry at all. And my father came from the other room and he asked her like, what's going on? And she said something along the lines of, Dad called, Dad was on the phone. And at that time, it immediately clicked in my mind. Obviously, I know who Mom's dad is. It's Grandpa, it's my grandfather. And when she finally got settled and she was able to say what happened, she said that as soon as she answered the phone, her father said, "Hi, Sue," and he had a very distinctive voice, and I can even remember what it sounds like now, even though he passed away when I was just about to turn 6, or when I was 6 years old. He had a very gravelly, deep voice, and it was unmistakable. You would know if you were hearing him rather than a stranger. So she knew without a doubt that it was her father who had passed away that was on the phone. And that kind of kicked off a lifetime of interest for me in ghosts and the paranormal and just like what is beyond this life. And it definitely started right at that moment. So from that point forward, as a little kid, like the only thing I ever really wanted to read about was ghosts and scary stories. And I remember going to the library in the town next door, because at that point my neighborhood didn't have a library. And there was this one little nook that would have ghost stories and stories about aliens and things like that. And I would just sit in this nook in the adult section of the library, even being very young, and I would just sit and read every story that I could get my hands on that was about this, and any book that was about this. And I remember at the library, most of the books were just, I think, like compilations of just stories of ghosts of New England and things like that. But I absolutely loved it. I couldn't read enough when I was a child about all of this. And so as I started getting a little bit older, I started realizing like, oh, I could actually start getting involved in the paranormal. I don't just have to be reading about it from other people's perspectives of what they saw and what they experienced. And so when I was a preteen, or maybe a little bit younger than a preteen, I'm not sure what exact age I was, but I was pretty young. My grandmother, she got me a Ouija board, and I remember playing with that alone a lot. And occasionally I would start having like rappings happen on the wall. So anybody that has had any kind of spirit contact with rappings or knockings, like you would know that it doesn't sound like a typical knock. Like you can't replicate it by just knocking on the surface of a wall. It doesn't sound like that. The like spirit rapping sounds like it's almost like a popping knock coming from the inside of a wall. It's very unique. So I started having that happen when I was a child, and I was playing with the Ouija board, and at a certain point I think I had read too much about how they're dangerous and they're not safe to have in your home, and I kind of scared myself into not using it anymore. But instead what I did was I started having seances with my little friends. And so this must have been around, I would say 11 to 12 years old. I would invite two of my friends over, one of my friends over, and we would just sit in the dark with a candle lit on the table. And we would say, is anyone there? Can you give us a sign if someone is here with us right now? And you would think just some kids, some little girls sitting in the dark, they wouldn't have anything happen, but things started to happen. And again, because I was just kind of consuming so much information about the paranormal and about ghosts and everything I could get my hands on at that age, like nothing was scaring me. Like I thought everything was magical and wonderful and like this is the coolest thing ever, but my friends didn't really see it from the same viewpoint. So I remember, I think maybe during one of the first like little tiny seances that I had with a friend, the candlestick that was on the table between us, it moved across the table. I would say like it moved maybe like 4 or 5 inches, and that really scared my friend. And on another occasion, we were sitting in my kitchen, and my dad had an old radio that was, I want to say from the 70s or the 1980s, and he would plug it into the wall when he wanted to listen to it while he was cooking, but otherwise it didn't have any batteries on the inside of it or anything. And so my friend and I were having one of these seances, and we said, can you give us a sign? And the radio turned on, and it started playing classical music. It was really light, it was beautiful, it sounded really nice. We looked at the wall, and it wasn't just interesting that the radio turned on by itself, but it was not plugged in. And when I picked it up and I turned it around the area where it would be able to take batteries, I looked at that and it was empty. It didn't have any batteries in it. So upon realizing that and kind of pointing it out to my friend, like, hey, look how cool, like this radio turned on and there's no possible way that it was getting any kind of electricity or power. Like, she got very frightened. She was supposed to sleep over that night, and instead she ran out of the room and she went to my mother and she said, like, I want to call my mom. I want to get picked up. I want to go home. I want to go home. And I remember that was possibly the last time I ever had a sleepover at my house with that particular friend. And I think it just scared her too badly. And so I didn't have too many more experiences with seances as a child after that point, just because I was starting to, I guess, turn into the weird girl or the weird kid, and just, I don't know if people were starting to become afraid of me or just afraid of what was happening when they would be with me. Yeah, I didn't do too many other things with other children at that time. But I do remember there were a few more things that happened when I was a kid that really stood out as being out of the ordinary, supernatural. So there was one particular night that I was taking a shower, and there's a big mirror on the wall in my childhood home that covers most of the wall. And I remember getting out of the shower and everything was misty and steamy, and so like the whole mirror was fogged up except for one perfectly round circle at my face height, my head height. So it was almost like while I was in the shower, something or someone had somehow made this perfect circle just like right where I would stand, so I wouldn't have to like wipe off the fog and the mist myself. And that bathroom had glass doors, so I could see that nobody had come in while I was in there. And right next to that, even more strangely, was the numbers 24/7 written in the steam. And so it was almost like it was written with a pen. It wasn't like anybody who has played around with steam on a mirror after getting out of the shower, like, you know what it looks like if you use your finger to write anything or make anything in the mist or in the steam of the mirror, excuse me. And it didn't look like that. It was like a pen or a pencil or something very precise had written 24 and then the number 7 underneath it. And also what sticks out in my memory is that those numbers didn't look like they were written in, I guess, modern penmanship, I guess I could say. They almost looked like they were like something you would see in a journal in the 1800s. Maybe even the 1700s, but yeah, definitely like a bygone era style of writing. And I thought, well, that's weird. I don't know what that message is supposed to mean for me. And so I just dried myself off and I left to go get dressed. So later that night, I was up late by myself and I was watching television, and I have no idea what hour it was, but everybody else in the house had gone to sleep. So it might have been summer, or it was the weekend. And so I was up by myself, and when I started turning the lights off and I started heading to the stairs to go upstairs and go to bed, there was a clock at the bottom of the stairs where it used to be an old kind of doorbell chime, but it was like this wooden box or wooden surround that was mounted high up on the wall, and it had a clock in the middle of it. But the doorbell at that point had either been disconnected and we didn't have one, or we had replaced it with a different one. But whatever the case was, it was at that point just ornamental. It didn't work anymore, and it was, I guess nobody in my house really wanted to just take it off the wall and then have to patch up whatever kind of marks it had left. So as I was going to the stairwell, I heard very loud ticking. And this was the same night that I saw 24/7 in the steam on the mirror in the bathroom. And I stood right underneath it and I looked up at this clock and I saw that the clock was ticking backwards. And so the second hand was ticking back. But as that was happening, I also saw, I believe, like the minute hand moved at least once in the backwards counterclockwise motion. And so at that point, knowing again that it was like the radio, it wasn't connected, it wasn't wired, it didn't have any way of actually operating, I got pretty afraid and I ran upstairs and I just went straight to bed. So that was really weird. And even though that might sound scary, especially for a child to go through, again, because I just thought it was like, oh, well, a ghost must have done it. And I thought ghosts were cool and I thought ghosts were interesting. I wasn't that bothered by what was going on. The last kind of supernatural thing that I really remember standing out from when I was a kid is that I started getting into EVPs when I was a little bit older. So it might have been when I was a young teen, maybe, not sure if it was right when I had started high school or middle of high school. But I started recording with this tiny little handheld recorder. And again, I was almost like following the same pattern of a home seance where you would just say like, hey, is anyone there? Do you want to say anything to me right now? And one of the first recordings that I ever picked up was something saying, Hudja. So I believe I had said, is anyone here with me right now? And there was just static on the recording. And then I said, if someone is here, what is your name? And it said Hudja. And I ended up looking that up on the internet later. And again, early days of the internet, but still I think we had it in the home for a few years at that point. And I don't know if it was in Aramaic or Hebrew, but in an older type of language, Hudja as a name kind of translates to grandeur of God or something like that. And I remember that really standing out to me in my mind when I was much younger as, oh, like there's a possibility that whatever this being is that's around me is not just a typical ghost. It might be like something that God sent to speak to me. And that was the last real nice EVP that I picked up, and one of the only EVPs that I picked up when I was a kid before I stopped using it, because after that point, I would just turn on the recorder and I would say, is anyone here with me right now? And I would just hear this like kind of garbled moaning sound, and occasionally it would be interjected by an old woman's voice saying like, pick me up, and nobody that I knew had ever died in my house or fallen in my house. I couldn't attach that message or that voice or anything to any particular person that had been in my home, and it sounded really scary. And any subsequent time that I tried to record something in my room, I would just get that like moaning, in pain, kind of suffering sound being picked up, and I was like, oh, this is horrible. I don't want to record EVPs anymore if this is what's going to come through. And that was really the last kind of major supernatural thing that I remember happening when I was a child. So all of that to say, a lot of it, while telling these stories, it sounds like, wow, that should be really frightening for a child. But I guess if you have a child, or you were a child that was really interested in the paranormal, that could not get enough information about magic and different types of religions and what happens to us after we die. And again, also at that time, I loved reading about near-death experiences and angels and stuff like that too. So I was just reading as much as I could to just understand what I am as a spirit, as a soul, as somebody that is not just this body. I thought everything that I had gone through was just really amazing. And I thought it was a testament to kind of the fact that we are not just our bodies, we are our consciousness. And that kind of set the stage for so many other things that ended up happening in my life. I did end up going on to become a spiritualist, which I no longer am, but that has all of its own stories. And I've had so many other types of contacts since then, and it all kind of spiraled from everything that I was focusing on as a kid, and just all of the information that I was really in love with that had to do with the supernatural. So I guess that is it, and thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.